Welcome to the AstroGuy Podcast. I'm your host, Wayne Zuhl, and today we're diving deep into one of the most important concepts in astrophotography, total integration time. If you've ever wondered why some astrophotographers spend many hours capturing a single target, then this episode is for you. We'll break down what integration time is, why it matters, and how you can optimize it for better images. So whether you're just getting started or looking to improve your astrophotography, stick around because we're going to unlock some of the secrets behind getting the most out of your images. So let's get started. Let's first start with the basics. What is integration time in astrophotography? When we talk about integration time, we're referring to the total amount of time your camera's sensor has spent collecting light from your target. It's the sum of all your individual exposures, often called subframes or just subs. These frames will later be stacked to produce an image for post-processing. Let's say, for example, that you take 60 one-minute exposures of an object. Doing the math, that's a total of 60 minutes or 1 hour of integration time. It doesn't matter whether those subs were all taken in one night or over several sessions. As long as they're well aligned and calibrated, they all count toward your total integration time. Okay, so we know what total integration time is, but why is it so important? Well, when you're imaging faint objects like distant galaxies, nebulae, and the light coming from those objects is incredibly weak, and it's buried under layers of noise, thermal noise and read noise from your camera, along with light pollution and atmospheric effects. The more total exposure time you collect, the more real signal, the actual light from your target that you're capturing. At the same time, stacking all those subs together will average out much of the noise. So more integration time equals a better signal-to-noise ratio, or SNR, and that's the name of the game in astrophotography. Now, it's important to note integration time isn't just about stacking a ton of data for the sake of it. It's about improving data quality. More time means better contrast, fainter details becoming visible, and less aggressive noise reduction in post-processing is needed, which preserves more of the real structure and color in your final image. Think of it like filling a glass with rainwater using a leaky funnel. If you only leave it out for a few minutes, you won't collect much. But if you leave it out for hours, even with some losses, you'll eventually gather enough to fill the glass. That's what total integration time does. It gives you more of the faint signal you need to make a great image. In short, integration time is how long you're gathering light, and the more good quality data you collect, the better your final results will be. Again, we've defined what integration time is, so now let's dig a little deeper into how it interacts with exposure length and the types of noise that we deal with in astrophotography. Let's start with exposure length, that is, how long each individual subframe is. Your exposure time will vary depending on your gear, your target, and the sky conditions. I have found that trying different exposure lengths with different filters and rigs yields the results that I'm looking for. Sometimes I go as short as 10-second subs, while other times I'm doing 300-second subs. But here's where the balance comes in. Longer exposures allow you to collect more photons per image, which means you're increasing the amount of useful signal from your target in each sub. That's great, right? But with longer exposures come challenges. You have to manage things like tracking and guiding precision, local sky brightness, and thermal noise from your camera's sensor. If you go too long, you might start to overexpose bright stars, saturate the sensor, or start to see too much background light from your local light pollution. And if your guiding isn't spot on, you'll end up with odd or egg-shaped stars instead of nice round ones. On the flip side, shorter exposures reduces those risks. They're more forgiving on your mount, and they give you more flexibility to discard bad frames due to wind gusts, airplane trails, or passing clouds. But shorter subs also collect less signal in each frame. So to make up for that, you'll need a lot more of them to reach the same total integration time. And even then, the signal-to-noise ratio might not improve as quickly as you like. So how does this tie into sensor noise? Your camera introduces different kinds of noise. The big three are read noise, This is added every time the camera reads out an image. It's more significant in shorter exposures because you're taking more of them, so that noise adds up. Then there's thermal noise. This is heat-related noise that increases the longer your sensor is active and the warmer it gets. Cooled cameras help to mitigate this a lot, but it's still a factor, especially for longer exposures. Shot noise is the random statistical variation in photons arriving from both your target and the sky background. It's fundamental and unavoidable, but it averages out with longer total exposure time. So what you're doing with integration time is collecting as much signal as possible while managing and averaging out all these sources of noise. The trick is finding the right balance between exposure length and the number of exposures that your equipment and sky conditions can support. Here's an example. Let's say your skies are pretty light polluted, and anything over 2 minutes starts to wash out with sky glow. In that case, you might stick to 90-second or maybe at most 2-minute subs. But you're going to have to take a lot of them, at least 60 to 100, to push your total integration time high enough to begin to get a cleaner image. On the other hand, if you're under dark skies with a cooled camera and narrowband filters, you can go 5, 10, even 20 minutes per exposure. You're going to get fewer subs, but it's going to be higher quality data in each one. Okay, let's take a look at some real examples of how total integration time impacts your final image. Where I live in a Bortle 7 zone, I can usually take exposures up to 5 minutes long, depending on the target, the seeing, and how my rig is configured. For example, with brighter deep sky objects, like say a globular cluster, I'll shoot 60-second exposures, but I'll capture hundreds of them, like in this image of M5 that is made up of 124 60-second exposures for a total integration time of 2 hours and 4 minutes. Now, here's a single 60-second exposure of M5. In it, we can see the cluster, but we also see vignetting in the corners of the frame, and there are shadows that look like donuts. These are specks of dust on the camera sensor, and there's lots of noise visible in the image. It doesn't look smooth. Now, let's compare it to the final stacked image. Zooming in and comparing it to the same area, you can really see how much more detail is visible, and that a lot, but not all of the noise has been averaged out. After post-processing, even more details become visible, and the noise can be mitigated even further to produce a clean, richly detailed final image. Another example is this wide-field image of the North American and Pelican nebulae, where I shot 5-minute exposures, but ended up using 291 of them, for a total integration time of 24 hours and 15 minutes. In a single 5-minute exposure, you can see the nebulae, especially the brighter parts, but the image is very noisy. Let's look at the raw stacked image to compare. Now here, you can really see a huge difference. Let's look at them side by side and compare a couple of areas. In the area known as the Cygnus Wall, there is a tremendous amount of detail in the final stack that is mostly lost in the noise in the 5-minute subframe. All that dark nebulae is barely defined in the subframes, but it becomes clear in the stacked image. The difference is also very apparent with the Pelican Nebula. Let's zoom in on the same areas in a single sub and then look at the stack. Wow, look at that. The level of detail in the nebula is really obvious, and the noise is nearly gone in the stacked image. So these two examples show some of the advantages of increasing your total exposure time. But there's something important to keep in mind: diminishing returns. Early on, you'll notice that adding more integration time dramatically improves your image. But after a certain point, say going from 5 hours to 10 hours, the improvements become more subtle than in a shorter stack. You'll still gain a cleaner image, but the differences might be much harder to notice unless you zoom way in or plan to print very large images. These are the diminishing returns. So the smart thing to do is aim for a practical balance. Enough time to get a clean image, but not so much that you're wasting clear nights chasing tiny gains in detail. As a way for me to figure out what the right balance of total integration time for my setup is, I spent several nights shooting NGC 281, known as the Pac-Man Nebula, with my 70mm refractor and an Optolong L Extreme filter. I had used a combination of 182nd and 300-second sub-exposures. From all that data, I've created different stacks, totaling 1 hour, 2 hours, 4 hours, 8 hours, and the final stack, which is just under 32 hours. Let's take a look at the stacks and compare them. The only processing that's been done to them after stacking is star alignment and gradient removal. Nothing else to keep the comparison fair. Here's a stacked 1 hour image, and you can clearly see the shape of the nebula, and some details are starting to come out, but the image is very noisy, and it clearly needs more data. Here's the target after 2 hours of integration time. It's less noisy, and some details are beginning to show. Let's look at the region toward the center of the nebula. By doubling the integration time from 1 to 2 hours, we can see a lot more definition in both the brighter and fainter regions of the stack. By doubling the time from 2 hours to 4 hours, we see the brighter parts of the nebula appearing even more defined and a lot less noisy. The darker areas still have a lot of noise, but even the dark nebulae are beginning to show some definition. If we collect and stack another 4 hours of data, doubling our time to 8 hours, now we're beginning to see some subtle variation, especially in the dark nebula, as those details are starting to show up. Overall, the image is much less noisy, and it's a huge improvement over our 1 hour stack. Let's double that time again to 16 hours. Again, the details are now becoming more distinct. Note the brightness variations and subtle red hues that seem fuller now than in the shorter stacks. My final stack for this project contains 31 hours and 17 minutes of integration time. Now the noise, while present, is much more subtle, as a lot of it has been averaged out in the stacking of the data. The brightest portions of the nebula are virtually noise-free, while some noise can still be seen in the dark nebulae and fainter regions of the nebula. For this project, I was starting to see diminishing returns. The improvement from 16 hours to the final stack is noticeable, but not as noticeable as in the earlier steps. I suppose that if I had the patience to shoot another 32 hours, I could improve the image more, but in this case, this is where I stopped. After working with the final stack in PixInsight, this is how the post-processed image of NGC 281 looks. After deconvolution, color correction, additional noise reduction, and star removal, I played around with the curves before adding the stars back in to produce this image of the Pac-Man Nebula. By increasing the total integration time, so much more can be pulled out of your images. But you need to be patient and capture enough so that you can see the difference. But you also need to know when enough is good enough. Here are a few tips to help you get the most out of your imaging time. Plan ahead. Maximizing integration time often starts before you even set up your gear. Check the moon phase and plan your targets accordingly. For broadband targets like galaxies and clusters, try to shoot during a new moon or when the moon is well below the horizon. If the moon is out, and especially if it's near your target, consider switching to narrowband imaging. Narrowband filters, like the Optilong L Extreme filter or similar dual band filters, allow you to cut through light pollution and moonlight by isolating specific emission lines, like hydrogen alpha and oxygen 3. For example, this image I captured of M42 in the Running Man Nebula was taken under a nearly full moon using an L Extreme filter, and the results were surprisingly clean and detailed. Another thing to do is stack your data over multiple nights. Don't feel like you have to get all your data in one session. Some of the best images come from hours or even dozens of hours of total integration collected over several nights or even weeks. As long as you maintain consistent framing and focus, stacking across multiple nights is a great way to build up signal while keeping individual sessions manageable. For any deep sky imaging, the next step is a must. Use calibration frames. Darks, flats, and bias frames. They're not glamorous, but they are essential for clean data and a clean final image. These calibration frames help to remove sensor noise, vignetting, dust motes, and other optical imperfections that can otherwise obscure faint details in your final image. Proper calibration can make a significant difference, especially when you're stacking many hours of exposure. While they may seem a bit daunting at first, you'll quickly learn how much taking these frames will have a positive impact on your final images. Another important thing is you have to be patient. One of the biggest lessons I learned early on was to slow down. When I first got into astrophotography, I tried to image 5 or 6 targets in a single night. It was exciting to see all those images, but the integration time for each one was maybe 45 minutes, an hour at most. The result? Noisy images with poor detail and limited dynamic range. Once I started committing more time to fewer targets, the improvement in image quality was dramatic. Even a modest increase from 1 hour to 3 or 4 can bring out fainter structures, reveal more color, and reduce noise significantly. Another thing to keep in mind is that more is better, or at least usually better. But you have to know your limits. In general, the more integration time you can gather, the better your final image will be. More data allows for deeper detail and lower noise, but there are those diminishing returns. Doubling your integration time doesn't necessarily double the quality of your image, but it will improve it. Just be mindful of your time, storage space on your computer, and processing capacity. So the next time you're under the stars taking images, remember, total integration time is your secret weapon. Whether you're shooting with a DSLR or a dedicated astronomy camera, the more time you spend capturing photons from your target, the better your final image will be. It's not just about gathering more data, it's about building a stronger signal and reducing that ever-present noise. Stacking dozens or even hundreds of images allows faint details to emerge from the background. Subtle structure in galaxies, wisps of gas in nebulae, and delicate star clusters all become more defined as the signal improves. Even if you're only capturing 2 or 3 minute exposures, the real magic happens when you accumulate hours of total exposure time. That's when your image really starts to pop, not because of a fancy camera or perfect sky conditions, but because you gave your subject the time it deserved. Planning ahead makes all the difference. Spread your imaging out over multiple nights, use broadband filters when the sky is dark, and switch to narrowband when the moon is up or conditions are less than ideal. Don't worry if you can't get everything in one session. Astrophotography is a marathon, not a sprint. Consistency and patience are more valuable than a single perfect night. And don't underestimate the impact of calibration frames. Darks, flats, and bias frames help you clean up your image so the precious signal you're collecting doesn't get lost in sensor noise, vignetting, or dust shadows. They are an essential part of the workflow that helps ensure that your long hours under the stars will pay off in post-processing. And finally, don't rush it. When I first started out, again, I was so excited to shoot as many targets as possible in a night. But with only 45 to 60 minutes of data, the images looked muddy and noisy. It wasn't until I committed to shooting fewer targets and longer integrations that I saw my images begin to transform. It's tempting to chase variety, but depth will almost always give you better results. So give yourself permission to slow down. Choose your target wisely, track it patiently, and keep stacking those frames. Your future self will thank you when you see what your images can become with a little more time and a lot more signal. Well, that's all for this episode. Thank you so much for joining us, and I hope that you found our time together to be fun and helpful. If you have questions or episode suggestions, please email us at astroguypodcast@gmail.com or leave us a text or a voicemail at 973-404-0380. If you're not already a member, please join the AstroGuy Podcast group on Facebook. You can also visit our YouTube channel, the AstroGuy Podcast, for past episodes and other surprises. Please do all the podcast and YouTube things such as like, subscribe, comment, and share. It really helps us. Thank you again for joining us, and may your skies be clear. As always, carpe noctem, seize the night. I'm Wayne Zool, and this was the AstroGuy Podcast. Thank you for listening. As always, your questions, comments, and suggestions are welcome. Keep wondering. Keep your eyes on the sky. Have fun. Carpe noctem. Seize the night.